Welcome back to another episode, folks. The final episode of this week, Midweek with Eric Smith. Thanks again to Adnan Virk for joining us last night. Sean, what's going on, man? How you doing? Hope everything's well with you and your family. Richard, good to see you again. Jeff Marek has entered the mix. I'm going to tap on his name and add him to the show. Jeff, what's going on, man?
Hey, Smitty, how are you, pal?
I'm good. How you doing?
I am well. Just finished watching another episode because now that we're on quarantine, I don't have to watch hockey games till 2 o'clock in the morning every night.
Right.
I'm plowing my way through all 10 seasons of The Walking Dead. I've never seen it. My kids have never seen it. I don't know if I'm going to be on the cover of today's Parent Magazine anytime soon, but my 8 and 10-year-old are watching it with me and my wife, and so we just began season 8. I don't know if you're a Walking Dead fan, Smitty, but
yeah, I've seen it. I have seen it. Yes.
There have been a couple times, Smitty, where my wife and I have kind of looked at each other and said, "Oh, I don't know if the kids should be watching this one. This is a little bit snug. I'm not so sure, but hey."
Well, I'll tell you this. I just 10 minutes ago finished watching Jaws, like the original Jaws. And I have a 10-year-old as well now, and he even looked and he's like, that wasn't that bad. Now,
you know what?
I think I'm pretty liberal with stuff like this. Like, I can tell you a list of movies that we've shown him that I probably shouldn't have. Yeah. But I got to say, man, I don't know that I've shown him The Walking Dead. So I give you credit. I give you credit. Like, I don't know
about credit, but listen, Jaws, that's one of my, so I'll tell you a story. So Jaws is one of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah. I still, to this day, the USS Indianapolis scene with all 3 guys in the boat and we delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb, I still get the chills. So our second kid is born and his name is Brody Quinn. And I really wanted Brody Quint, my 2 favorite characters from Jaws. Wow. And my wife's like, you're not getting both. You get out one or the other. So we got Brody for Sheriff Brody and Quint turned into Quinn. So it's Brody Quinn. But that's one of my favorite movies, Smitty. Good.
Now, I got to say, I wasn't going to start here, but, there's no rhyme or reason to this thing. So seeing as you brought it up and talking about your viewing habits and watching Walking Dead, you said you're season 8, so I don't want to give any spoilers away here. You're season 8, you said?
Season 8, yeah. So we're episode 3, season 8.
Okay, so who is your favorite character to this point in any season?
Carol.
Really?
Going away, Carol.
Wow.
Hands down. There is no better character development from the beginning to right now than her. Every scene she is in, she steals it. Like, there's some really good acting in this. Like, there's some fantastic acting. But anytime Carol is on screen with anybody else, she just wipes the floor with them. It's not even close. To me, and I know she's not ultimately the star of the show, but to me, Carol's the finest.
See, I like Michonne. I just something.
You like the katana. That's why.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Chopping off heads.
Yeah. Well, and in the first few seasons when she had the 2 zombies on the chains and walking with them and whatever, like I thought that was awesome.
Just holding them, walking them through. Oh,
yeah.
She's got the good look too, right? Like, let's face it. Well, she looks fantastic.
There's nothing to not like there. Yeah. All right, I want to ask you this. So I say this at the beginning of every episode that I've talked to different folks. I don't know if you've watched any, and I'm not offended if you haven't, but this isn't just to talk about like current day and thoughts on the pandemic and what's happening in the NHL. I want to go back to like it's to me more dealing with you and your story and where things started. So bring me back to a young Jeff Marek. And I know I've heard the stories over the years from you, and I've heard you on other shows as well, talking about, digging graves and everything else. But even before that, a young Jeff Marek growing up in the GTA, what was the thing that made you tick, and what ultimately led you on the path that you finally got on in terms of radio, television, broadcasting, etc.?
Quite an accidental career, first of all. But growing up in the God, my hair looks bad tonight. I just been sort of lying on the couch with the kids, like the Kraft peanut butter bear. Poof. growing up in the west end of the city in High Park, not too far away from Michael Grange, went to the same high school as Granger, Humberside. I always wanted to be a hockey player. I was a goaltender, played in the, dating myself here, before it was called the GTHL, it was the MTHL. That's how far back I go. Grew up a big Maple Leafs fan. Mike Palmetier and Borja Salming were my guys. Didn't get drafted in the OHL. And you know what I did, Smitty? I quit. And I stopped playing net, and that was it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to play. I'm just going to have fun. I'm just going to be a hockey fan. But no, growing up, like to me, it was all sports and music. I played drums in various bands. After high school, we'd play like the Horseshoe and Lee's Palace and Sneaky D's. And to me, it was all sports and music growing up. I always had music on in the household, and always playing sports.
Now, you just said you quit. Why'd you quit?
Because I didn't get drafted. I was like, I had built, honestly, I had built so much into it, and all my coaches, oh yeah, you're going to get drafted in the OHL. And 87 was a real tough year for me personally. My mom had just passed away, was not doing great in school, and like the whole thing just sort of fell apart. And I had a miserable season, and it didn't happen for me, and I quit. I was like, I'm not feeling it anymore. But the interesting thing about that is, Smitty, it's interesting how life hands you stuff. So I call like 86, 87. I'm like, that's it. I'm done playing hockey. And I'm like, I'm pretty sour with hockey at that point. I'm still young. I'm like 16, 17 years old. And then 1987 happens. And to this day, I still maintain that 1987 is the best year that hockey has ever seen. We had the Canada Cup 87. We had Rendezvous, which was fantastic. We had the Easter Epic, which is the Islanders and the Capitals. As you all know, Kelly Rudy, one of the command performances of all time. And the Canada Cup, and the great 7-game series between the Oilers and the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, I don't want to get overly poetic about this, but it almost felt as if, that was hockey saying, hang on, come on back. Like, there's a lot of good stuff here, and that reattached me to the game. But just as a fan at that point, I just went on to be like a bad rec league hockey player. I went from a goaltender to being a bad forward. But yeah, 87 to me was always like, and I still talk about it to this day, is the finest year ever for hockey.
So let me jump back to the hockey for a second. And I've used this line in previous episodes as well. If I ask you something you don't want to talk about, tell me to screw off or don't talk about it. But you just mentioned your mother.
Yep.
I've been somewhat fascinated, intrigued, and surprised, because I don't know everybody's backstory to this extent. Because a lot of times people that we know, and I've known you for a long time, but I don't know all of the inner workings and private details of your life by any means. Mm-hmm. But I think of Chuck Swirsky last week telling me that his mother died in his arms. Sherman Hamilton recounting his father's passing at a young age and how that impacted you. I'm lucky enough that both of my parents are still alive, still healthy. I just saw them earlier today, and spent 20 minutes 6 feet apart on their driveway, just kind of chatting in the driveway. It's surprising to me almost to hear about how many different people that I know in the industry that we're all kind of in and around the same age, who unfortunately have lost one or both of their parents. So what was that like for you, as a teenager, albeit later in your teens, but still a teenager dealing with the passing of one of your parents?
Yeah, that was a tough one. Like everything was, it was drawn out because my mom passed away of brain cancer. And so it was, and I can still remember being in the car with her in the West End, driving down Roncesvalles Avenue. This would have been August of 85. And she said, you know what, I got this headache that won't go away. I think I'm going to get it checked out. I'm going to go to the doctor next week and get him to check it out. And then a week later it was, boom, Mom's a Princess Margaret. And like the whole world changes. And then just to, I'm young, I'm like 15 years old. And then every day, week, month, watching her deteriorate to the point where, Smitty, I remember one phone call that really messed me up because obviously your brain starts to go. I would talk to her on the phone every night and say goodnight to her before I went to bed. And she said to me, okay, well, don't forget to say goodnight to Jeff for me. And I went, I am Jeff. And she goes, oh, I know that, but just make sure you tell Jeff. And I'm like, inside, I'm like, do you know what's going on right now? Like, do you know who you're talking to? And I can recall there was a moment that made me think back to that, because we'd go visit all the time with Princess Margaret. there was one moment in the Tragically Hip show, the final concert. Grace 2 has always been my favorite hip song, and there's that great scream at the end. So
Yep.
last show, it's Kingston, and Downey gets to that part, and it's frightening. Like it's the most chilling one that I've ever heard him do. And like the camera cuts to people in the audience, and there's a shot of one woman who's just like horrified listening to this. And it took me back to 85, I think. Yeah, it was 85, either 85 or 86 when I was at Princess Margaret with my mom and talking to one of the nurses, and there was someone who was like screaming in her room. And I said, naively, like I'm 15 years old, like, what is she doing? And the nurse said, she thinks she can scream out the cancer. And
Yeah.
it took me, and honestly, Smitty, I hadn't thought about that until that moment at that Tragically Hip concert. But no, it's tough. Like, so I was adopted, and my parents got me after 7 days. My original birth name was Keegan Sean Laughlin. I was Keegan Sean Laughlin for 7 days, Smitty. I have a great relationship with my birth mom. I found her. You like this story, being a radio guy. So I found my birth mom. I applied at Children's Aid when I was 19. The parent can apply automatic, like right away. And so we made a connection. We started talking and exchanging letters and phone calls. And she says, well, this is when I was working at AM 640 at Young and Norton. I used to be up at the Q building there.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you have a broadcast background in your biological family. You have someone that works in radio. And I said, who's that? And she said, Kathleen Rankin. Now, Kathleen Rankin was a colleague, and earlier that day, I just had lunch with Kathleen, and we had been working together in the same building for like at least a year, maybe 2 years, and to have that one drop on me from my birth mom was a stunner. Like that was a shocker. Mom made an adoption plan for me when she first got pregnant, and she didn't go back to St. Stephen, New Brunswick, where she was from. She went to Montreal, worked for La Presse and Le Journal, had a really, really interesting career covering organized crime in Montreal. You can understand how sensitive an issue that may be as a young journalist. Remarkable woman. Her and her family still live in Montreal and TMR. We see them all the time. They always come to visit, and our family always goes over there. So I was blessed and lucky, Smitty, that I didn't have one mom. I had two. My father, by adoption, passed away last year. I was there, thankfully, or two years ago, rather, when he passed away, which was a beautiful moment. You talk about a parent dying in your arms. I was there to hold my father's hand when he passed. So that was a really beautiful moment that I was lucky to be part of. But yeah, I was really blessed with two moms. I don't know my biological dad because he only knew my birth mom for a week, hitchhiking from London to Scotland.
Oh, wow.
in the summer of 1968. So there you go. There's
That's kind of an interesting twist there too.
Yeah, there's the nickel and dime tour around my life, Smitty.
Well, now to go back though to you saying you kind of gave up on hockey because you weren't drafted, but I got to imagine, I have no, psychology background here, but if you're a teenager dealing with a mother with brain cancer and a mother that's eventually, unfortunately, passing away, while you're still trying to concentrate on school and schoolwork and getting your marks, while you're still concentrating on, being a kid and being a teenager and driving and peer pressure of high school and girls and everything, life, period.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty obvious to see why maybe things didn't work out. And that's not to say that you weren't still a good hockey player, but you had a lot of stuff going on then that you're dealing with mentally, let alone physically.
And I had two friends that I thought were friends that were trying to help me called drugs and alcohol. And it turns out they really weren't trying to help me at all through all of it. It took me a long time to figure that out. But it's like that's the time when you're sort of transitioning from being a boy to starting to become a man and starting to understand responsibility and starting to understand what life is all about and what's on the horizon and how it's not all just giggles anymore. And now it's time to start to get serious in some ways about your life. So I don't know. I don't like to do the woe is me story with my family situation because everybody has stuff that they go through and they deal with in their own way. But I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't tough. Like it was, honestly, like some days were just hard to get up and go to school. And my dad, bless him, I mean, he was just mourning the loss of a wife. he did everything that he could to try to keep some type of normalcy in our lives while still holding down a full-time job and still mourning the passing of his wife. Like, I don't know how he was able to do that. And for me, it was like a lot of times just tough to get out of bed and go to school, let alone pay attention throughout an entire day or do homework and go to hockey practice after school. It was tough, but we all have things in our lives that are challenges.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, everybody, it sounds cliche, but I always say that everybody does have a story, and everybody's got something to deal with. So it's, and it's probably current day as well, even in adulthood, everybody's got something, everybody's got an issue to deal with, or something that the public maybe doesn't necessarily see. And I don't mean that just for you and I, anybody in any walk of life, whatever their job may be, there's always something kind of behind closed doors that people maybe don't reveal to their coworkers, to neighbors, whatever. You don't always know what's happening in people's lives. So I always do my best, as best I can, to not judge people. I fail sometimes, but I try my best not to,
Be nice, right? At the end of it, try your best to stay alive and be nice to everybody around you. There's a saying that I'm always reminded of, Smitty, and it's an old Buddhist saying that says, we're all born with two lives, and our second life begins when we realize we only have one. So cherish every. What did you think of other great sayings? Enjoy every sandwich is another great one. Real simple. Enjoy every sandwich. Enjoy every day and try to enjoy every moment and be nice to people along the way. Just try to. It's Smitty. The older I get, the less I look for differences in things, and the more that I look for similarities in things. And I don't know if that's just a byproduct of age. It probably is. It's easy when you're young to point at things and say, this is different than that, and that sucks, and this is good, and point out. It's easy to stare at, notice the differences of things that stare at you in the face. I believe it was Yeats that once said, brilliance sees difference, genius sees unity. And I think the older we get, the more we can understand that. And we're going through this right now with the pandemic, where we realize that your health is directly related to my health, and my health is directly related to James's health and Fufar's health, or Farfari's health, rather. On the chat, like how we're all related, how we look at our windows and realize that, half of our lungs are hanging in that tree, and without those trees, our lungs don't work. Like, I think that as the older you get, you realize that things are more similar than they are different, and we're all joined together. So let's try to be nice to one another.
You know what I battle sometimes, Jeff, and this may fly in the face of everything that you and I have both said, or at least what I've said. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I say this to my wife all the time, and this is honestly my daily battle. That book, and I think there's been multiple books that came out, I don't know, at least a decade ago, if not longer. Don't sweat the small stuff. I say all the time to my wife, I hate it, because to me, and this is the balance where how much am I pulling my hair out doing this, but I say sweat the small stuff. And the reason I say that is, don't sweat the big stuff. You can't control the big stuff, whether it's a family member that gets sick or passes away, whether it's a job, whether it's a pandemic, whatever it may be. Big stuff you can't control. So don't sweat the big stuff, but the small stuff, those little things that maybe you could change, maybe if you did something a little bit better, treated somebody a little bit differently, maybe focused on some people might say it's nitpicking, some people might say that it's again, worrying about the little things. But if you kind of enact change with those little things, if you kind of nip those little things in the bud before they become big things, maybe it doesn't become a big thing that you then need to sweat. So it's kind of finding that balance between not stressing over every single little thing, but at the same time recognizing those little things can become big things. So if you nip those little things early, maybe you don't have to worry about them later.
You know who teaches us those lessons on a daily basis, and sometimes we're completely blind to it? Children.
Yeah.
Because you know what children are concerned about? You know what children are fascinated by? Things like cracks in the sidewalks. Things like
so I'm a child, basically.
Right? No, things like, what your lip looks like when you smile. And when you think about it, like, who's closer to the origins of life than children? Not me, not you, children. That's why they find hide and seek to be the funniest game in the world. And you think about things like music. Music is a game of hide and seek. The melody's there, and then it fades away, and then it comes back, and then it heightens, and then it disappears again, and it comes back. I mean, this is life. This is all vibration. This is the lesson of children I think you're talking about, Smitty, because they're closest to the womb, they're closest to the origins of life, the genesis of life, and we ignore all of it. We always ignore, oh, it's just kids being kids, and we don't ever try to learn a lesson from it. But I think you're right. I think that's one of the lessons that children can teach us, specifically infants who are fascinated with the tiniest, like if you look at this, fascinated with the tiniest little details. Like if you think about life and what all of this is and what our place is in all of it, I'm a believer that, you know, we're all part of this one big process of nature watching itself. You know, we're part of that. All, and once, you know, once we, you know, cease to have a fascination with all that life can offer, it's time for someone else to have that view. And we pass away, and life is reborn. But I honestly, Smith, I think what you're talking about is the lesson that children can teach us. Like, what is more pure than a child's laughter?
Yeah.
That laughter is closest. That laughter is closer to the womb than you and I are. Let's learn from it.
I want to make sure my wife goes back and watches this so she doesn't tell me that I'm completely I'm completely crazy or neurotic or insane or just an asshole when we talk about why are you always worrying about the little things. I'm like, no, come on, focus on these little things before they become the big things.
Kids teach us this.
Yeah.
Pay attention to what's interesting to children. They are the closest to life. There's a lot of lessons there that we tend to ignore because, oh, they're only kids. There's a lot of wisdom there.
So, all right, let's go back now. The hockey thing, unfortunately, you know, isn't happening for you. You said that this career, this path in life happened by mistake. So, I'm sure I'm glazing over a ton of details, but you know, mid to late high school, all of a sudden, boom, college. How do you come together in terms of making that choice, where to go, what to do, what direction you think that your life is going to take?
Towards the end of high school, I fell in love with reading, fell in love with literature, fell in love with poetry, fell in love with theater, right? And so I just became a voracious reader. Now, I personally think as I look back on it, it was a way for me to withdraw from everything and just pour myself into a book and imagine I was somewhere else. Reading is a really lonely thing. Writing is a really lonely thing. And I think that's where I was at, and I buried myself in books. And I ended up going to the University of Guelph and studying English and philosophy. Those were my two. And I did my honors BA, and I remember saying to myself, I'm going to take a year off. I always wanted to do, like, at a certain point, Smitty, I said to myself, I want to chase the PhD. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to, you know, walk the groves of academe and conference hop and be a tenured prof and read books and write papers and write these, like, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's where I was at. And one summer, it was the summer of 1995, I took a summer job in promotions at the Fan. When Bob Makowitz was the program director, I had been working all my summers while I was going to university at Park Lawn Cemetery in the city's West End in Toronto. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to go back there. I'm going to go work in promotions. It's just a summer contract. It's like a June, July, part of August deal. And that's where I met Strombolopoulos, and I'd already known Bob Makowitz from playing baseball with him for so long. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take a year off and just hang around the radio station, learn as much as I can, and put off going back to school for a year. And then you climb one more rung up the ladder, Smitty. And I said, oh, okay, you know what? I'll go back next year. Like, somewhere along the way, Smitty, I stopped saying I was going to go back and chase the PhD, and this just became the career. But it's not anything that I ever planned for. It's not anything that I've ever set as a goal. Personally, goals don't work for me. I know I'm in the minority on this one. I'm not sure where you're at. I don't set goals. I wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to try to be authentic. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to pour everything I can into what I'm doing, but I don't want it to have a terminal point. You know, it's like, I don't believe in making a friend just for the sake of breaking up. And that's kind of how I see goals. So I just try to see where this thing is going to take me. You talked about not sweating the big stuff. The big stuff is going to happen. You know, you swim with the stream. And that's kind of where this career has taken me. I have no formal education for this. Like, none at all. Like, dude, I read, you know, philosophy and, Elizabethan, high tragedy. These are the ways that I relax. Like that's what I loved doing. And somehow I fell into a career here where I say things like, I think that was offside. Let's have another look. And, oh, that's icing. And we'll be right back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing I planned, Smitty. Nothing I planned. That's just going with the stream. But that's just me not setting a goal and just, look at, what it is? It's taking yourself out of your comfort zone. I've always been a big believer in taking yourself out of your comfort zone. When I first started broadcasting, I was really uncomfortable doing it. And that's why I liked it, because that was the only way I was going to grow as a human being.
Well, and somebody just actually posted something very similar to what I was about to say, in that I kind of tend to agree with you, because anytime you set a goal or set a bar for yourself, you're also potentially setting yourself up for failure. Because if you don't ultimately achieve that, are you in your own mind going to say, well, I didn't get there, so thus I failed, as opposed to, well, what did I achieve in trying to get to that point? Because ultimately things that you achieved may not be things that you expected to come across, to achieve, and those might be ultimately better than what that goal or that bar was. So I'm kind of the same way. I think in my mind, I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. I think in my mind, I've over the course of my career said, this is where I'd like to get to, or I would love to achieve this one day, but I don't know if I set benchmarks to say, well, if I get that, well, now I've made it. Because what happens if you actually get there? Do you automatically get there and say, well, that's it now, I'm done? Or is it you get there and go, well, now I gotta set another bar, I gotta set another goal to get there? No, you gotta enjoy the process, and then also enjoy having what you have, because that may be the only thing that you have, and what you have might be pretty damn good.
That's rich. That's being rich, right? Rich isn't. I believe. I agree with you 100%. Smitty. This idea, like, to me, the idea of, happiness isn't derived from getting things. Happiness is derived from being content with what you have. Like that's real happiness. And to the idea about setting goals and limiting yourself within that goal. Now that we're all, you're not doing basketball right now, I'm not doing hockey right now, you get a chance to pick things up and read things and watch things you haven't. I'm watching Walking Dead, you're watching Jaws, amen to you. I was reading one of William Butler Yeats's old journals. So he's my favorite poet, from when he was quite young, and there's a whole segment in there that really hit me hard. I thought I knew a lot about Yeats, but I didn't know this. He talked a lot about having to, when he's a young man, having to kill the idea of skepticism in his life, because he felt that if he was skeptical about something, that it put an artificial limit on him. And as an artist, as a poet, that shrunk the canvas for him. And so he spent a lot of his young life trying to get rid of being skeptical about things, because it limited possibilities. And he felt he could only be an artist if he had the whole canvas to work with, and had as many possibilities open to him as possible. That one really hit home with me.
So Jeff, let me ask you this then. You joined the Fan in '95, as you said, as an intern, and just to kind of get away, it's just a part-time job, an intern job doing promotions.
Remember the big ticket promotion?
Yes, I do.
That was me and Strombo and our fanatic army handing out tickets at Mr. Submarine.
So, but how does this morph then into what it became? Because now I came out of college in 96, 97. I started interning at the Fan in 96, was very, very quickly part-time, full-time, because of the Score, Headline Sports at the time, starting, and all the people that left the Fan in various roles, on mic, off mic, etc. Yeah. So you and I had some interactions, but not a ton. But how do you go from, and I know you said that's where you met Strombo, you already knew Mako, but how does it become promotions to suddenly doing a show at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, a couple of days a week, to that springboards a broadcasting career?
That's an interesting one. So it's a conversation with, now you remember, so this is when the Fan was owned by Telemedia. So this was pre-Rogers. And so one of the big wings of Telemedia was publishing. And so they wanted to get into the Gen X sports market game. This is when magazines, this is when Slam was starting. Like Slam was like, how cool Slam magazine. Like Slam magazine, super cool. And so they wanted to get into this Gen X sports magazine business, but they didn't really have anybody on staff that knew how to do it, or what to do, or even how to begin to put something like that together. So we were having a conversation with Mako Senior once and about it, and he said, "You know what? I want you to be part of this pitch to the publishing wing at Telemedia. Give us some ideas of how you would put together a Gen X sports magazine." And so me and Mako and Strombo went away for a couple of weeks and put together this sort of loose, sort of 8 or 9 page pitch of how this magazine could look. And I remember Mako looking at us across the table and saying, "How would this sound on the radio?" And we said, "Don't know." And he said, "Good, let's try it. You're going to get a time slot where no one's listening because you're going to be awful. It'll be Friday nights, like 2 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to give you the princely sum of $30 because that's the going rate for the hour. That's not $30 each. That's $30 for the three of you to put this." But it wasn't even about like the $10
Sure.
that you're getting. So that's how that began. That began out of a magazine pitch for Telemedia. If Telemedia doesn't have a publishing wing, I'm probably going back to do my PhD, or I'm working at the cemetery back in the West End. Like that's just it. Like along the way, there's so much. Like I say, so much of my career is just flat out luck, and that is a big one. Going to AM 640 when they get the Maple Leafs rights and end up doing a show with Bill Waters, which was my on-ramp to doing hockey full-time. I just happened to be there. Like it's kind of this Forrest Gump existence of just being lucky. But one of the things that first year that I was there doing the show with Mako and Strombo, do you remember a guy by the name of Jim Rose?
Yes.
Remember the Jim Rose Circus? So Jim Rose,
yes.
For your listeners, for your viewers that don't know, Jim Rose Circus was a circus out of Seattle, like this crazy circus where there's like fire and chainsaws and guys getting darts thrown in their back and blood and piercings and weights hanging off. Crazy, right? Toured with Lollapalooza and just did like gross out stuff. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And we got to interview Jim Rose once. I remember going out to lunch with him afterwards, and he said something to me, Smitty, that always stuck with me. He said, "So you're just starting this out, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Jim, I don't know if it's going to work. I'm having fun. I have no aspirations to do anything other than just hang out with my buddies, talk on the radio a couple of times a week and call it a day." And he said, "Well, just so you understand, like somewhere along the way, and it might not even be with this career, but with another career perhaps, but just understand something, because you're going to get to a crossroads. You're going to get to a spot in your career where you're going to have to make a decision. And ultimately, Smitty, there's no right answer to it that you realize immediately. The answer shows up years later, and that's cruel. But it happens to everybody." And he said, "Here's the situation. Here's the crossroads you're going to get to. You're going to get to a spot in your career where you have to make this decision. Do I quit or do I work harder?" Sometimes the right answer is to quit, right? And I'm sure you've seen people that have said to themselves, "I'm not going to quit. I'm going to work harder." And it was the wrong decision.
Yeah.
So you're going to get to this spot, and there's no right answer, and it's cruel. But just when you do get there, and you will, just understand that everybody in your industry has got to that spot. And at the end of it, luck's going to play a huge role in all of it. And so far, I consider myself lucky, Smitty.
Well, I'll tell you, and I've told the story a couple of times for those that have watched this regularly. Anybody that's watching right now, I apologize for sort of repeating the story for the second or third time. But when I started doing the show 5 weeks ago, the first guest I had on was Elliot Friedman. Mm-hmm. And the reason I had Fried on, your co-host, your cohort, on the 31 Thoughts and whatnot, I had to have him on because, to your point about the luck, as I said a couple moments ago, if Headline Sports doesn't start, Elliot Friedman likely stays at the Fan. Elliot was the Raptors reporter. I'm this young guy who just happened to come out. I just happened to come, like, had I graduated 2-3 years earlier, 2-3 years later, I came out right as the Raptors were starting. And I was this weird Canadian kid that grew up on basketball and baseball more so than hockey. I loved Wayne Gretzky. I loved the Oilers. My neighbors 4 doors up were Gretzky's aunt and uncle and first cousins. I've been to the house in Brantford. I played road hockey with Wayne on my street when I was 8 years old. I've been to the shrine, to the den in Brantford in the house with Walter and Phyllis. I played baseball in the backyard with Brent and Glenn and Keith. Like, I know them. They don't know me. Like, this is like 30, almost 40 years ago. But I was a huge Gretzky fan. But at the same time, I loved baseball and I loved basketball and the Showtime Lakers. And all of a sudden, I come out of college and Toronto has its own team for the first time. And within a year, Elliot Friedman, George Stroumboulopoulos, the two Raptor reporters, within a year, year and a half at most, boom, both are gone. A door opens, the fan acquires the rights, and things start to move up the ladder from there. And even I'll say to you, and having you on, part of my ascension and part of my path in my career as well, the only Olympic Games that I've had a chance to work, the Olympic Games in London, calling men's boxing, and I get a call from Rob Corte in the middle of the summer after I just sold a condo and I'm in the middle of a move and I'm trying to buy a house, and I see Rob Corte. I'm thinking, one of the bosses is calling, like, what the hell? Like, this can't be good. Why are they calling me in the middle of the summer? It's not the NBA season. And it's, what do you know about boxing? And the real answer is not very much. But the answer I gave was, I mean, yeah, I know boxing, of course. Yeah, sure. Well, I mean,
figure it out. Yeah.
But why? What do you need? Well, Jeff Marek was supposed to do men's boxing. He's had some issues in his family, and I didn't even get into it. It wasn't my business. But Jeff, unfortunately, isn't able to do it. Can you do boxing for us? I'm like, for what? For the Olympics. I'm like, but like, what do you mean? Can you do the play-by-play for every weight class in men's boxing, and the Olympics start in 6 days?
You were
and
great.
It was like,
you were great.
Oh,
I watched all of it. So that was, because I mentioned my father passing away a year and a half ago. That's when he first started to get sick with congestive heart failure. That's why, and it was sudden. And I was like, this is like, I had to spend like the whole summer. This is when he was living in Mississauga. Because after he had that, we moved him into our house here. We're on the border of Stouffville and Uxbridge. We moved him up here, cleared out what is now my office. This was his bedroom. And so he spent his last, 5-6 years living here with the family, with the grandkids. But that was the beginning of his health problems. So you did me a solid there by bailing me out. Because I remember talking to Corty. I'm like, I can probably do it, but just so you know, like, my brain's going to be a million miles away because, you know, I'm going to be going essentially between CBC and the hospital with my dad. And Rob said, I know the guy. And that was you.
Well, I don't know if you knew the guy, but he took a shot. But all right, so again, let me rewind again here.
But hang on a second. Let me tell you. I don't think you've ever heard this story then about you, because I can still remember when you got the Raptors gig, because I was there when you called Strombo to tell him, and he was so happy because he would always talk about, oh man, Smitty's got to do the Raptors. Smitty's got to do the Raptors. Smitty's got to do the Raptors. And I can still remember we were in Kleinburg. I'm not sure whether it might have been at the, you ready for it? At the Binder Twine Festival.
Oh, wow.
All right, the Kleinburg, and I think we had just talked to Pierre Burton, who lived in Kleinburg. And he got off the phone with you, and he was like doing the pumpernickels and all that. And I'm like, what's up? He goes, Smitty's got the Raptors job. He was just like a proud dad, Strombo was.
Well, I appreciate it. I haven't heard that story. And I appreciate hearing it because, you know, George obviously is another guy on my path, because when I think about, so after you guys did the late night thing, and now you've since left to 640. Actually, no, you know what? It might have been at the same time. Now I'm trying to make sure my chronology is correct.
No, that was
you were still there.
I got fired the first, and then I went back later to do a pro wrestling show. Did I ever tell you how I got fired?
Yeah, law.
Man? Yeah.
No.
Did I ever tell you how I got fired? You'll love it.
I mean, if you did, I don't think I remember. So.
So this is me, Bobby, and George. So Nelson, whom I love, and Nelson Millman has helped me tons in my career. Great guidance, like all of it. But I mean, it's the industry, and people are going to come, people are going to go, people are going to fire you, and they're going to be your friends sometimes at the same time. And so this is, you know, before the internet, there's no emails. Me and Bobby weren't even called into Nelson's office for a meeting. I get a phone call around, it's like a Thursday afternoon around 4:30 from George. And he's like, dude, have you talked to Nelson? And I'm like, no, I never talked to Nelson. Like, I'm like this junior, like late Friday. What am I going to talk to Nelson? He goes, because you just got fired. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, you and Bobby just got fired. I go, how do you know we got fired? He goes, there's a note on the fridge at 40 Holly Street saying effective immediately. Jeff Marek and Bob Mackwitz are no longer needed. We're canceling game. But George will stay on to do, I think he was board op for Spider, I think at that point. And maybe doing some Raptors. I can't remember what it was exactly. But I remember that, like, I'm very proud of this. And I think George still has the letter from Nelson, but I was maybe the first at the Fan. I think probably the first to get fired on the fridge. Can you beat that one, Smitty? I got fired on the fridge, not an email. I got a piece of paper and a fridge magnet. That's how I got turfed.
The only thing, this doesn't come close to beating that, because no, I've not been fired by a memo on a fridge that I didn't even know about. But the only thing I can say that my little whatever, I was going to say claim to fame, but that's not even the correct terminology. I had not signed anything. I mean anything in my career until about 18 months ago. Because other than my original contract when I was a producer at the Fan, when I was 22 years old, making, poetically, $22,000 a year was my starting salary. And when I was signed as a full-timer by Nelson Millman and Chris Clark, going 22, 23 years ago, I signed, obviously, a piece of paper then. I don't know what the hell I signed. I don't know where that contract is. I don't have a copy of it. But from that point on, from producer of The Big Show with Gord Stellick to Raptors pre-app and post, evening host, Raptors analyst, Raptors play-by-play, TV, all the stuff, boxing, whatever it might be, tennis, baseball, all the stuff I've done over the years, I've never signed a piece of paper for 20-plus years. And Dave Cadeau, program director at the Fan,
no way,
comes to me about 18 months ago. He says, we should probably, get something in writing, yada, yada, yada. I said, what do you mean?
Hang on. Well, we've had an HR department for how long?
I've never signed anything. Never.
You had
it's just like, he's a full-time employee. Here you go. Just here's your paycheck every 2 weeks. And he's a full-time, and that was it. Even the transition from Telemedia Rogers, I don't know. I have not signed a piece of paper. So Cadeau said, we need to get something in your file just so it's in writing. Yeah. So, yeah.
How does that slip?
I have no idea.
You had him over the barrel. That's where you start negotiating. And that's where you do the old that's where you do the old trick where you're about to sign your name on the contract, you sign Eric, and then you put the pen down, you negotiate more until you sign Smith.
Yeah. I should have done that. Where were you? Where were you 18 months ago? I don't know if that's actually Kevin BX or if it's somebody else with a similar handle, but he's saying, who is this guy, Jeff?
I think that's Kev. Kev's awesome. Kev's awesome.
Hey, Kev, I appreciate you tuning in. Just click on my name at the top. But hey, I'm a colleague of Jeff at Sportsnet, albeit on the basketball side, not a hockey side. But we haven't even talked hockey to this point, anyways, and we're 43 minutes into the conversation.
There's no hockey going on, bud.
Yeah, no, this is what I wanted to do anyways, more conversations. All right, so I did have my chronology wrong, because that's probably why I had my very brief window with Strombo. It was after Bob and Jeff get fired. So I go in to do probably similar time slot. It was either 2 to 4, 3 to 5 or something. It was after Spider, and it was Strombo and I going on and doing the show together, and he was clearly the lead guy. He had experience, and I had next to none. Very first show we ever do together, he brings his snakes into the studio, and his snakes are crawling around, and I'm losing my mind with this snake crawling over me while we're doing the show.
Did he have the white one?
No, it was some sort of python, I think it was, but it wasn't the white one.
Okay.
We come back the next week to do, I think we'd done 2 episodes. We come back the next weekend to do, Friday, Saturday night again, or Saturday, Sunday. And that's when he told me, hey, I got some news. And it was, I'm leaving the Fan. And I remember being crushed because I was thrilled for him, no doubt.
That's a CFNY gig. That's a CFNY gig? Yeah.
And this is where I'm thinking, I finally have a chance to get on the air, and I'm doing this on-air hosting stuff, and now George is gone. That's that's it for me. I was thrilled for him. But, so anyways, all right, so go back to you then. So after being fired, then how does the gig ultimately come to you going to 640?
Okay, so let me do this really quickly. So after get fired at the Fan, I get a phone call from Shelley Klink, who used to work at 640, who's now the assistant program director at an upstart internet radio station called Virtually Canadian, which used to be at King and Parliament across from the old Toronto Sun building. They're starting up a new venture, an online radio station. So I sign up there to do shows and work as the program director with a guy by the name of John Walters, who has since passed away. They're created or helped create various properties. A very young Sid Sixero used to do this amazing hockey show there with Mike Stevenson, which was called Offside, which you ever asked Sixera about it, it was like, honestly, the best hockey show I've ever heard in my life. Essentially, it was like Spittin' Chicklets, but going back to like 1997. It was awesome. And from there, I started worked on a wrestling program and started a wrestling radio / print company, helping to publish various books, and started a radio show out of that internet company. So it was back on the Fan. And then right before the Fall book, which is a big no-no, man, was Nelson mad. I left the Fan right before the Fall book to go to 640 to take the whole property. I think it was one of those get out of my office type meetings with Nelson, and that's how I got to 640. Then it was called Talk 640, and then in 2001 it evolved into, God, someone's got to write a book about it. The old Mojo Radio station. I can still remember the handle. Talk Radio for Guys, Mojo Radio, the all-new AM 640. It just rolls off the tongue.
Oh, yeah. That's really easy.
Going to break and coming
Looks
back.
great on a T-shirt, everything, yeah.
Just so simple. And then from there, it was the Leafs Lunch Radio show. And from there, it was a phone call from Scott Moore that changed my life, saying, hey, we'd like to interview you for this new internet radio. Not internet, it was a satellite radio show that we're putting together. Hockey Night in Canada Radio, and it was doing Rinkside on hockey nights and doing Beijing Olympics in 2008, which was a real trip. So that's how I got to there. And then from there, it was another conversation with Scott Moore, who had left CBC, gone to Sportsnet as my contract was expiring with CBC, and he's the guy that brought me to Rogers, and here I stay.
All right, so I'm going to put the hockey stuff on hold again for a second, even though we only have about 12, 13 minutes left. Instagram kicks you off at the 1 hour point, so we don't go past the 1 hour. Yeah, like literally it pops up on my screen. I don't even think it comes on your end. 30 seconds. Like you don't get a 5-minute warning, you're done. Now you can log off and come back on or whatever. Maybe I'll bug you to come on another time, but we're done in 13 minutes. So before I go to some of the hockey stuff, though, the one thing that I remember about live audio wrestling and that show, that brand, was to me how good it was in terms of showing the how real the sport is when we talk about the sports entertainment aspect of it, because there was the entertainment that we all saw, and there were many interviews that you did on that show that were certainly from the entertainment angle, but the sports angle, the athletes that these guys are, the stories behind the scripts that are being written, the storylines that are being followed, the business of the business of wrestling. I found that stuff fascinating, and I know that I applied it into the few times over the years that I had wrestling interviews. I say to this day, 2 of the best interviews, I don't know where I'd put them, top 5, top 10, top 20, whatever they may be, but 2 of the best interviews or most entertaining interviews I've ever, had a chance to be a part of, Mick Foley and Ric Flair.
Yeah.
Like, incredible, incredible stuff.
Yep. Now, let me ask you a question. If I was on the radio and I announced that I was going to interview Tom Cruise and you tuned in, okay, Marek's talking to Tom Cruise at 4:30, and I welcome Tom Cruise onto the show, and I start interviewing him as if he was Jerry Maguire, the character, what would you think of me?
Yeah, I think you're probably crazy.
You're a joke.
Yeah.
And that was always my thought. If I'm bringing a professional wrestler on, I'm not going to interview him or her as the character they portray on television. I'm going to interview them as the human being who's playing that role. I didn't think that was that revolutionary, but I understand where, traditionally it's the, just play into the myth, maintain the fiction. Oh, what are you going to do with them when you get them in the ring at Maple Leaf Gardens? Like that kind of stuff. I've always just found it way more compelling just to talk to them like human beings, because they are. And you know what we found in doing that show is they find it much more refreshing because they don't have to keep up with the act. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't have to be in character all the time.
No, and you know what? You got 2 of the greats. Foley's a magical interview, and he's always candid and thoughtful. It helps that he's crazy, and he's completely different away from the ring than he is in the ring, where he's an absolute savage and puts his body in harm's way consistently, or he did, and took some of the biggest bumps the industry's ever seen. But then when you talk to him, all he wants to do is talk about how much he loves Christmas and roller coasters. Like, I've always found him like one of the more interesting and compelling sports figures in North America.
You know, I remember him telling the story about how he lost half his ear,
To Vader.
or most, yeah,
Trapped in the ropes.
Yeah, and getting stuck in the ropes with the rubber casing off, and it was essentially just that exposed wire, and his head stuck, and he's getting choked out, and he pretty much has to rip his head out from between the two wires, and ends up losing half the ear. Then the ear gets chucked around the ring somewhere, or kicked out of the ring, and they can't find it in time, and he just like, well, that's the end of my ear. Like and he just tells the story so matter-of-factly, like it was nothing.
Well, a lot of these guys, they just, okay, well, let's just get to the finish and we'll get backstage. You know, a lot of these guys, I mean, Freddie Blassie would always talk about this. Like, a lot of the old, like even before Mick, like some of the old timers, they really took pride in, and a lot of your viewers are going to laugh at this, how many times they got stabbed by whether it was knives or old ladies with hat pins on the way to the ring. Like, that is, okay, if I can get this crowd whipped into a frenzy where they are so believing what I'm doing, that they want to either try to stab me on the way to the ring, or prick me with a hat pin, or take a swipe at me when I'm getting to the ring. Like, that's considered doing your job if you're a heel in the industry. And a lot of those old timers, most of which we've all lost now, that whole generation has pretty much died out. But they would pride themselves on it. Like, they'd compare. It was hilarious. We go to the old timers, the Cauliflower Alley Club, and they'd be comparing scars. Oh yeah, this is Oklahoma City. This guy got me with a knife. Or this guy attacked me outside the dressing room. Just a crazed fan, who was really believing it. Like, that was, to them, that was part of their art. And as painful as it might have been, Smitty, that was a compliment to a lot of these guys that they had the audience going along with the fiction all the way to when they would pull out a knife.
Do you still watch wrestling?
Not as much as I used to. Obviously, I just don't get a chance anymore. I still go down the wormholes. But what I do now, like I got this like real love of Japanese wrestling from like 92 to 97, All Japan Pro, Giant Baba's promotion, which is a really strong, stiff, athletic style of professional wrestling. It's not a whole lot of showmanship and rolling and tumbling. It's a lot of big power moves. And so there's a few guys that I really like: Mitsuhara Misawa, Toshiaki Kawada, Kenta Kobashi. Like, these are the big three for me, and I can watch those Tokyo Dome 60-minute matches and every day of my life. So when I do go down the wrestling wormholes, I usually find myself going to like All Japan Pro 93 and 94. Misawa and Kobashi were like the best peak performers I may have probably ever seen in the history of professional wrestling. So I go backwards more than I.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't watch it anymore. I mean, with no disrespect to the guys, and I'm sure there's plenty of great ones right now. And maybe it's just age, maybe it's just a generation thing. I don't have time. Well, there's that too. I mean, we certainly have time now, but when things are normal, I don't have time. But I'm just not as into it. Whereas, of course, you and I had the heyday of the 80s, let alone, being in our late teens, early 20s, watching, whether it be Stone Cold and The Rock and that kind of generation, that pocket. It just doesn't seem like it's the same anymore. So
I'll tell you what, because I grew up in Toronto like you did, and Maple Leaf Gardens to me was a mecca for not just hockey, and I spent a lot of time watching hockey games there, whether it was the Maple Leafs, whether it was the Toros, whether it was the Marlboros. A lot of hockey there, but for me it was always pro wrestling too. And Tunney would run, the Sheik would run. I mean, there was a lot of and they would always run. Tunney would always run really uniquely, and no one else did this. And I always thought, like, okay, everybody does this. And then if you grow up and you find out later he's the only guy that does it. I mean, Tunney would run Boxing Day shows in Toronto, and it was great cards because he was the only guy running in all of North America. And some of the guys who didn't want to be home for Christmas, didn't have a family to go to, wanted to get a good payday because the place was full. You knew you could get a good payday if you worked Toronto on Boxing Day, and everybody had cash in their pockets from Christmas the day before. It was always a sold-out house, and you got to watch professional wrestlers from a lot of different territories that you never saw before. So I always liked those Boxing Day cards as a kid. But the first main event, and it spoiled me, Smitty. It spoiled me for the rest of my life. The first main event I ever saw at Maple Leaf Gardens, it was when Tunney was working in associate with Mid-Atlantic. So they had to have their matches, top three. The main event was over the Mid-Atlantic U.S. title, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat.
Oh my God.
Probably the best in-ring feud the sport has ever seen, and that was my first main event. I remember, taking the subway home with my dad, thinking that wrestling is amazing, thinking it's all like that. Because this is my first show. I learned pretty quickly. I probably just saw the best match that I would ever see as my first main event.
It's all downhill from there.
It was.
All right, let me wrap this up. We got about 3-4 minutes left here. I'll kind of end it where we started. By your own admission, by your own words, you talk about just kind of luck, right place, right time, et cetera. And it's, part of it's luck, but there's a whole lot of skill that comes into it too, because you can be right place, right time, you can have luck, but if you ultimately can't do the job, you're going to be found out real quick. Did you kind of have that moment to ever sit back and think about how poetic, how prophetic things turned out to be, where just when you thought your life/career might start or might ultimately end up in hockey, it didn't, and here you are 20, 25 years later as one of the lead hockey broadcasters in the country, where you went from an internship at a radio station to a late-night guy talk type show to a wrestling show to a guy's talk show to suddenly, boom, doing hockey, which springboards to Hockey Night in Canada, which springboards to Sportsnet, and here you are today. So even though you started this interview saying, hockey, it wasn't working out for me, it didn't work out on the ice, and yet here you stand at 50 years old in hockey.
December 29th, 2007. It's my first rinkside assignment for Hockey Night in Canada. 6:30, I'm in Ottawa. It's a Senators game against the Washington Capitals. And for the pregame show, I'm interviewing Alexander Ovechkin, bench side. It's leading off the pregame show. And in my IFB, I hear Ron open up, and we're going to go to Toronto. The Maple Leafs are facing off against the Buffalo Sabres. Elliot Friedman checks in a couple of moments. But first, to the nation's capital we go, Canada, just outside of Ottawa. Welcome to the broadcast for the first time, host of Hockey Night in Canada Radio, Jeff Marek, standing by with Alex Ovechkin. Jeff. And Smitty, I've watched it since then. And it doesn't seem like there was a huge pause, but in my brain at that moment, hearing Ron McLean throw to me in Ottawa, I went back to my couch on my house at Indy Road Crescent in the west end of the city and thinking, watching Hockey Night in Canada and playing all those hockey games and how much hockey is all meant to me. And it hit that one moment where I was like, holy shit, I'm on Hockey Night in Canada. That was the moment for me, Smitty.
That's incredible. You know what? And a perfect way to end it. That's awesome. That's awesome. Kudos to you. Congratulations to you, and to many, many, many more years when we obviously get out from under what we are in right now and get back to some sort of normalcy and get back to the games on the ice, on the court, whatever it may be. I appreciate the time, man. Thanks for doing this. All the best to you and your family, man.
Thank you. You and your family stay safe, stay healthy, stay well. To all your viewers as well, the same. And it's been a lot of fun, man. This is a real treat. This is something we normally wouldn't be able to do while our respective sports are on. So thanks for letting me into your party here today, Smitty. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, and thanks to everybody watching as well. All the best, folks. Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Thanks, Smitty.